Well, hello, my name is Dr. Reiter, and I'm a practicing homeopath, naturopath, chiropractic. It includes a lot of modalities, lots of experience in different areas. Um, the training in naturopathy was quite extensive. Tonight, I'd like to speak to you um, regarding homeopathic medicine. And there is a theme that I go by in the office called be heard and be healed. This little axiom has a lot of meaning, and I'd like to explain to you what I mean by that slogan, be heard and be healed. It's especially applicable for those who practice homeopathic medicine and for those who receive homeopathic medicine. They need to understand what being heard and being healed is really about. And there's an older axiom in general medicine that says a case well taken is 90% cured. So that would always encourage all the students to take a thorough case history. It's standard in training of all disciplines in healthcare. And I would say that homeopathic medicine is one of the originators of being so detailed in the case history taking. What is true about all practitioners is that none of us, no doctor, no practitioner is going to try to extract information that there's no relevance or no usefulness for. Um, all of us will try to get to the goal, the clinical goal at the time, in the most efficient way possible. So what's taking place today is that there's a model for case history taking in modern and modern conventional as well as alternative medical education that involves a preset series of questionnaires and interrogation. And so the doctor could be with the computer and charting. Charting is a real big business today in medicine. And that involves like, okay, what is your chief complaint? What are your vitals? Your personal data, your personal history data. What's the history? What's your medical history? What's your family history? And in terms of in medical history, that covers a lot of ground, like what medicines do you take? What supplements do you take? If it's a female, we'll inquire about gynecologic history and obstetrical history. And it goes on and on. And these are pre-set boxes that are clicked off in the computer program. And we can get through that rather quickly in 20 minutes, 15 minutes. There's a lot of data that's extracted from a patient. And it's required for modern day charting. Charting has insurance implications, so it has to be done a certain way. There's codes that are tied to many things. And the goal of the whole interaction is largely to arrive at a diagnosis, or at least to start the process to arrive at a diagnosis. There could be other things that are needed, of course, like physical exam findings, laboratory findings, imaging findings, etc. And so it's That's not the same as what I'm saying is to be healed and be heard. Oftentimes, a patient has said that they haven't mentioned something that they thought was because they thought it wasn't relevant to the case history taking of the doctor, or they were told in the past that it bears no relationship to the chief complaint. And yet, some of this data that is not found in that computerized routine interrogation can be the most important data to arrive at an understanding of the patient as well as a treatment that's based upon that understanding. Homeopaths, since the beginning, and the beginning is 1796, the first paper published in a journal, in a medical journal on homeopathic medicine was in 1796 by the founder, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann in Germany. Since the beginning, the homeopaths have been looking for the minutest details of a patient's case. And there's a reason for it. Like all other docs, we don't want to waste any time, our own time, the patient's time, in talking over things that will not help us achieve our goal. The details are very important. Over the 2 centuries, it's been discovered with homeopathic case taking that subjective data is just as important, or in many cases, even more important than the objective data. What does that mean? Objective data includes what you observe and measure. So you can measure your blood pressure, you can see a skin lesion and describe that skin lesion. It's red, it's raised, it's excoriated, it's moist, it's dry, etc. A cough is a visible thing. I cough at such and such a time. That's objective data. I'm coughing. You can explain what it's like. You can take a chest x-ray and get more objective data about it. Subjective data includes how the patient feels and experiences things. And extracting information, extracting truth by the subjective reporting of a patient can be critical in relieving ailments for a patient. For example, a patient is complaining of grief, and so there's depression, and there's parameters today for depression on what constitutes that diagnosis. There's major depression and minor depression, various kinds. But the actual experience of the depression is not going to be found in the DSM code book, which is a psychiatric book that classifies psychological states. It's going to be found in the intimate details of the person's experience. Homeopaths will encourage someone to express how they feel and what they perceive. Whether it makes sense or not doesn't matter to the patient. It doesn't matter. Whether it's logical or not doesn't matter. There are many illnesses, many experiences we have inside ourselves that aren't necessarily logical. That's why we keep them inside. Because we present ourselves to the world in a way hiding our inconsistencies or our illogical thoughts. But when it comes to a doctor-patient relationship, it's time to be truthful. So a patient who's suffering from depression, and by today's standards, there's a good chance they'll get an SSRI, right? There's many of those today. These antidepressants, that particular category, will flood your brain with serotonin because it blocks the usage of them in other areas so that the concentration rises in the brain circulation. And now your brain is flooded with serotonin, and it behaves, it thinks, and it feels differently when it's flooded with serotonin under the influence of a variety of SSIR antidepressant drugs, the antidepressants. It forces the brain to be subject to a high serotonin level. A person with depression, regardless of their personal story, could all receive SSRIs. But in homeopathic medicine, we're going to ask them about what the experience of the depression really is. And some may explain the physical pain of it, the emotional pain of it. They may describe it in a certain way that implies that it's their feelings that are hurt. It's their feelings that they experience it so much. It's how much they meant to them. They lost somebody or something in their life. Another person may describe their depression by how sad they are because what was lost represented a source of security to them, comfort. It was a part of who they depended upon. And now they feel alone, helpless, without that support. There are many ways that a person can experience depression. It's as colorful as all the flowers in the field. People have so many ways of expressing what comes under the name of one diagnosis. It's those differences in the unique stories of patients, the unique truth that a patient reveals if you give a person the right environment, which is time and patience and sympathy and trustfulness and kindness, alongside a doctor being observant and keen to catch the verbal and nonverbal cues when talking to a patient, and the proper questionings. Homeopaths are not so much interested in the story of how a person was injured or became depressed, how a person became sick. That's relevant data, but what's more important is the reaction to an external stress, because that's where the illness really lies. The stressors in our environment are the things that cause us ill health. And it comes in any form. I mentioned psychological. So when we lose things we love, when that those are psychological traumas, when we're abused, when we're emotionally abused, when we're neglected, when we become jealous, when we're traumatized emotionally in so many ways. That is a very fertile, a very common ground for the source of our illness, the triggering factor that overcomes our health and our resistance and our immune system. It takes time to hear those details, because treatment is based upon those details, upon the unique path that a person took in their journey of illness. How a person arrived at a diagnosis, how a person arrived to the point of being sick matters. It isn't only important that they have a diagnosis and have arrived at a point of illness. The journey to that diagnosis counts too. Because if we investigate the journey there, we can often find causes. Causes are implied when something traumatic happens near the onset of symptoms. And if you're not listening, or if you have a biased mind, you won't put the two together. A mom brought in her child for constipation. And this child was a little over 2 years old and has had constipation since 6 months old. And she was tired of the continual prescription of Miralax. She tried probiotics and other good GI health habits, fiber and magnesium. But the child still remained constipated and needed that Miralax to go at all. Occasional enemas. Well, something was wrong. What does the history reveal? It began, the case was actually cured. So hindsight is relevant here. It's useful to bring out the point of being heard and being healed. The mother thought that it was vaccination that caused the constipation. Well, I'm open to that. But the other doctors told her that's impossible and to forget that. She was very distressed that she wasn't heard. And she got emotional when I said I was interested in that. I wanted to hear what you mean by that. So this child's life included, at 6 months old, getting a rotavirus vaccine. And after the vaccine, the baby at 6 months had some blood in its stool. Well, she noticed that and put those two things together in her mind. The blood in the stool passed, it went away over time, and the baby was not constipated. Then there was a second rotavirus vaccine given, and that's when the constipation began. So the rotavirus is a vaccine for a virus that has a profound action on the GI system. Well, chronology implicates etiology. What that means is when something happens close to the onset of a symptom, there's a chance that it could be related as a cause. Well, the mother was relieved, and the mother was happy that I listened to that, and I did not find any other better reason in the case history for the constipation. So I treated the child based on that assumption that vaccination is the cause. It's an ill effect of the vaccination. The system is glitched. The system gets you get injured from any stressful stimuli that you don't adapt to successfully. The child did not adapt successfully to the stimuli, to the stimulation, to the stressful stimulation, to the immune stimulating effect of the vaccine. And it disturbed the function of the GI tract ever since. Well, in homeopathic medicine, we have the tools to address the vaccine injured. Been going on for a very long time. I did give the child homeopathic medicine for constipation after vaccination, and the child has been greatly improved ever since. And medicine was given less and less over time, and this is like a several-month follow-up, and things have gone well, proving that the assumption was correct. If you don't listen, you don't find. But it's bias also and preconceptions about what a person thinks is true or not also can prevent us from hearing. And that can happen to anyone. All doctors tend to do what they know. And if there's something that occurs that is not within the same paradigm, it's not known. The very term vaccinosis, which means illness from a vaccine, was coined by Dr. Burnett of England, who was a very prominent homeopath in the last century. The point of that small vignette is that you've got to listen, and many times in listening and in providing the environment for speaking, for allowing a person to say things that even we're told have nothing to do with it, that could be a key to the case, to the successful management of a case. The things that can mean the most are the most subjective, and it takes time for a person to reflect, to put words to a particular feeling or a sensation. And that's what a homeopathic interview tries to provide. A secure environment so a person can dig deep within themselves and find words to explain things like, what does that pain feel like? Or when does it occur? And they reflect on their life and think about the times. Or locations of pains or sensations, electrical sensation, burning sensations, anything. It takes time to reflect and get the right data out. The best homeopathic patient is one that is fairly articulate and can observe themselves without judging it, without speculating about it, just observing themselves, not telling me why, but telling me what. What happens in your life? What did you think? What do you feel? What did you observe? And then reporting that. That's an ideal homeopathic setting where we can be heard and be healed. The homeopathic medicines and their selection and their prescription is based on those details. And it's the specificity of addressing the symptoms of a patient that give homeopathic medicines its strength to make changes. If we can target the deepest things in a person, or the most characteristic things in a person, then wonderful results can follow. I recall a case of nephritis. There was inflammation of the kidney on one side because the person tried to relieve their cystitis and it didn't work. And so the infection traveled up. And a round of antibiotics did not relieve it. What did relieve it was homeopathic medicine that was based on the patient telling me the details of how it hurt in different positions. They had to reflect, and with pushing interrogation, they came up with unique details. And those unique details were found in only one homeopathic medicine, and making that prescription relieved the nephritis. There was one person, a young adult, that came in for epistaxis, which is bleeding of the nose. Well, after cauterization, the epistaxis returned. And I believe there was more than one cauterization. Cauterization, I think you understand, is when you go in and you singe the blood vessels and to stop the bleeding. Well, now they're here in front of me, and the reason for their epistaxis was found, bleeding through the nose, was discovered, and it was based, again, on paying close attention to what a person is saying or not saying. In this case, this was a young man who had the epistaxis as the chief complaint. In the morning, he'd get up and there'd be blood coming out of his nose. And what struck me right away was that he had really large ears. They were big. And they were noticeable. And he pretended that it didn't bother him. He's in high school. I ask him how friendships are. Fine. How are girls in your life? You getting attention there? Yeah, fine. Everything was fine. Everything couldn't be fine. But he was saying they were fine. This repression of embarrassment was the cause of his epistaxis. In homeopathic medicine, we have those medicines that can deal with a specific emotion like embarrassment, ailments from embarrassment. It exists. It's wonderful. So this one is called ambergrissia, and it also had about epistaxis in it too. It affected the nasal membranes. Well, this is what cured him. That's an example of like human nature where we don't want to go where it hurts. It's hard for us to look or speak or admit something that's painful. We want to, one strategy is just to ignore it, deny it, forget it. But that's what gives it its energy to hurt you. When we repress strong emotional states or strong memories or strong traumatic events in our life, and we try to go on and just go on, because that's all we do, right? We just go on. It can be a simmering, it can create a simmering pattern of stress that expresses itself psychosomatically. There'll be physical sensations. In that last case, there was blood coming out of the nose. And there's, of course, psychological expressions too. A characteristic of human health, human physical and mental health, is that human beings can allow stressors to be experienced, and then they move. We encounter them and they move through us and we let it go. To be adaptable, to be flexible. But we have thresholds for intolerance. And we come across things in our lives that are just too hard to stomach, too hard to bear. The memory is so painful. The event happened over and over again. The neglect, the abuse, the trauma of so many different kinds. The world is full of it. So many women have been inappropriately touched or approached at young ages, and they carry this all their life. And for some, it affects them their whole life. They don't want to look at it. The trauma of having disappointments in our situation, disappointments in our security, job changes, not acquiring what we need. These are serious, stressful events. And they create patterns in us. And that's what a homeopath is after, is pattern recognition. How is your mind and body maladapting in unity to some stressful, triggering cause in your past history? those are the stories of people's lives. It's how people present. They have a story. Everybody has a story. Not everything is like that. When people get sick with the COVID virus, it's our maladaptation since the COVID virus. It's a virus. And so we treat from that basis on. There's no need for psychological interrogation there, unless it shows itself and it's particularly frightful or anxiety producing, and then it means something. But otherwise, we just deal with the virus and we deal with the organs that are affected, and it's no deeper than having had the COVID or any other virus. So not everything is so complex, but a lot of human suffering is complex. Complex in the sense that there are things inside themselves. Patients have stories to tell. And unless the whole thing comes out, then treatment is largely, it's not rooted at the cause. I'm glad that there's drugs that overcome people's psychological states or physical states. They overcome an illness because they overcome the body. And that's wonderful that there's drugs that control people when they can't control themselves. But if a patient can control themselves, and what I mean by control, I mean that automatic control. I mean homeostasis. That's a term in physiology that suggests that there's a self-regulating, self-healing intelligence and organization in the body that runs on its own without our conscious effort. We don't have to think about breathing, we breathe. We don't have to think about our heart rate, it just beats. We don't have to think about vasoconstriction and vasodilation, meaning opening or closing of the blood vessels to dispel more heat or to conserve more heat or to flood muscles when they need it. Like, we don't have to think about those things. Those things happen automatically. Well, there is an entire operating system in our lower brain, I mean subcortical, that runs the show, but it can get glitched by traumatic experiences. We're not the same after having gone through something. I emphasize psychological trauma, but the traumatic events or the stressful events that human beings encounter that overcome their ability to maintain homeostasis can be from a lot of sources. It's viral, it's physically traumatic, falling down and skiing, it's a car accident, not well the same since. It's that concussion that happened a long time ago. It is, a head injury. It's a fright. It's weather. It's cold exposure or overheat exposure. So many ways that our being does not successfully adapt at a critical moment in time. We're social creatures. And one of the most difficult things for a human being to adapt to, and that is adapt means maintain their health, is when from persons that people love and depend on, they get double messages. It short circuits the brain. It short circuits the heart. It short circuits the whole person. They're not well. When a person you depend on and that you love and you believe they love you, but yet they hurt you. They hurt you and love you. They drink alcohol and act in unpredictable ways and frighten you. And they also buy you ice cream and buy you clothes and take care of you and do both. And there's numerous examples of that kind of polarity in life that sets up illness, psychological and physical. There is no doubt, none whatsoever, that the human being is a psychosomatic unity. What I'm trying to convey is um, that the mind affects the body affects the mind. We do not have a duality. They're not separate. It's only words that are different, but the interconnectedness is greater than the disconnectedness. A pathology teacher of mine said, there are two things that go through the GI tract: emotions and food. So many people have irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. That's alternating constipation and diarrhea. Very painful, colicky, searching for bathrooms, or constipation, distension, etc. And you can't even trust your own colon. And so what's the treatment? Well, okay, so you take fiber and you take, you take antispasmodic drugs because of it was also called spastic colon once before it was called irritable bowel. So relieving muscular contractions of the colon musculature, it helps, it feels better. And so there's drugs directed at the colon where the symptoms are being generated. Well, that'll help. People will become dependent upon it, but the cause is not relieved. Look into the history. Statistically, it's known that there's anxiety associated with irritable bowel syndrome. The information is there. And so in today's specialization, it's like, okay, so take this antispasmodic and also go to a psychologist and talk about your stress. Well, that's okay. But my message to you is that there's medicine that covers both at the same time, and that's a better approach. Medicine that covers the mental details of the anxiety and the way it expresses itself in the bowel too. And there's no limit to those patterns. Great success can happen when we see those patterns and prescribe for medicines that deal with those patterns of stress, patterns of symptoms. Patterns. What are patterns? Patterns are predictable formations. They help understand. They're based on understanding, on observing. That's the goal of the homeopathy. It's the goal of anybody who tries to solve any problems, is pattern recognition. Engineering, chemistry, everything is pattern recognition, is the logic that's used. Well, in medicine, we have this too. But the rationale in homeopathy is not to give something for the bowel and give something for the brain. It's to see if there's medicine that if these two symptoms, if these two areas are really an expression of the one same illness, let's find a natural, healing, properly dosed medicine that covers both symptoms at the same time and deals with cause. It helps uproot cause. Because the cause of much illness is dynamic. Before illness becomes too structural, it's functional. And while it's functional, it's repairable. Many people fall into that category. I am discussing the value of the small things that people have going on in their life when they observe themselves. I'm saying that there's importance to the peculiar sensations, the peculiar observations about our bodies, unique things. It's those unique things that individualize care. Individualization. It's what everybody wants. Everybody wants relief of symptoms. That's a reasonable goal. We all want that. But how we achieve that has an effect on the future of our lives, an effect on how we will react to further stressors, further illnesses, further infections in our life. If we treat ourselves curatively where we can, we then move into the future with more resistance, more homeostatic capability, meaning more ability to self-regulate, and therefore more resistance and a better immune system to deal with the next challenge in life. This is why for the children, it's nice to get them going on a healthy diet right away. Don't introduce the processed foods because you train the taste buds to enjoy only those kind of tastes. And then the real foods that have real nutrient density, the things that really promote health in our lives, seem boring. And they won't eat it. Chicken nuggets, pizza, and hot dogs. That's all processed. Nothing wrong with these things once in a while, but we don't want to train our children and train their taste buds to think that that's what food should be like. Because then a carrot is boring, loaded with carotene and wonderful nutrients, and all the other vegetables and all the fruits, and just plain meat that's pasture raised and grass fed, healthy, good food. The most important reason for healthy, good food is that our food becomes our blood. Our blood is made from our food. And that blood has to bathe every cell of the body. And in that bathing, cells can be healed. So the children, we want to get them on the right habits so that they're not limiting and suppressing what could be expressed and healed. So the common practice of giving Tylenol, children's Tylenol right away. You got to know what you're doing. Every fever has a reason. Why suppress a fever? What is a fever? A fever is the immune system acting. A fever is virucidal, meaning it kills viruses. It's bactericidal, it kills bacteria. So fevers really should not be suppressed, or at least know when to suppress it. Children can take a high fever. Protein coagulates at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. 107 seizures have been reported. Below that, there seems to be no ill effect. But that's not the practice that's done. Tylenol is given at 101, 102. That needs to be thought about. Because as young parents, suddenly you're thrown into making medical decisions for little human beings that you love more than anything else. You got to know what you're doing. So there are many examples of how a patient that can accept how they're ill and observe how they're ill and what's changed in them since they became ill and report it objectively without any speculation as to why, but just simply observing and reporting. Now, a doctor has a chance to deal with truth. And a homeopath depends upon that. Well, I hope I conveyed to you that you as a patient can be a very significant participant in your own recovery by listening to yourself, maybe journaling, observing yourself, noting the effects of time, knowing where things happen, noting what sensations occur in yourself. What is it that you really feel? What is it that you really observe? Be accurate with that. Note what triggers things, what makes things worse, what makes things better. What's the color of things? What's, whatever occurs in our skin or comes out of some orifice? What you think maybe caused it? What perhaps triggered things? This data is useful to any doctor, of course, but it's where we begin as a homeopath, because then we prod you into looking at things further so that we then try to develop what we call complete symptoms. Complete symptoms is where everything known about a particular complaint has been brought out, and then it's placed in the person to see if it forms a pattern. And if it forms a pattern, that's exactly what we're looking for. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I hope we can do this again sometime. Forgive me if I was, if I presented things too loosely or in a way that you couldn't grasp. If there was a question exchange, that would be different, and we could point to, any steps missing in your thought process. Have a good evening. My name is Dr. Reiter. God bless you all.